For months now, we've been telling the stories of those who served in Vietnam, now that it's 50 years since the fall of Saigon. After we traveled to Vietnam earlier this year with veterans who'd never been back since the war, we put out the call nationwide. We wanted to keep the conversation going. Tell us about your Vietnam experience. Our teams have been collecting the stories of Vietnam veterans from all around the country. Over the next few minutes, it's our honor to share the personal accounts of a group of veterans known as the Lost Generation, those who served in Vietnam. Hello, I'm Jeremy Howard. We are so glad you joined us. Our reporters, photographers, and producers from all over the country have been hard at work over the last few weeks. We've put out the call to Vietnam veterans. Tell us what happened to you during the war. How did it shape and change you? The response was overwhelming. We got emails from veterans from all over the United States, and our teams went out and interviewed them to learn more, and now we get to share those stories with you. Ron Fischer of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania wrote in and told us, I was drafted and sent to Vietnam. I was there for 2 years, 2 months, and 3 days. I was 20 and found myself in charge of a communication site and responsible for 20 plus men. Taught me to be a man very fast. Reporter Sarah Wilson from WHTM in Harrisburg met up with Ron to learn more.
They said to their dad, I want to go talk to Pappy about Vietnam. And he said, Pappy won't talk to you. I didn't know that.
Oh, don't apologize.
Forgive me.
Nearly 60 years later, Ron Fischer is finally talking about it. But still, it's hard.
Still brings flashbacks even as we're talking now.
Another standoff may be coming in the big battles expected south of the demilitarized zone.
Fischer was drafted into the Vietnam War in 1968, serving in the Army at just 20 years old.
I was there 2 years, 2 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days.
Some of the hardest of his life.
When I got over there, I kind of came to grips with the fact that I might not make it back.
Like many soldiers, Fischer was terrified. His first day in the infantry unit, a reality check.
We're on the way to the company in this 2.5-ton truck, and I'm sitting in the back bouncing along, and all of a sudden I heard a whoosh, and looked down, and there was a crossbow arrow in the bed of the truck. You never saw anybody kiss steel like I did.
That story, just one of many. Fischer and his fellow soldiers often found themselves under attack.
The problem was for us that there was, well, they called it a mountain right behind us. We would call it a hill, covered in foliage. And the Viet Cong would go on that hill and lob mortars into the site, trying to knock out communications.
Fischer was eventually promoted to sergeant, found himself responsible for over 20 men.
I'm not complaining because there's a whole lot of people who had it worse than me. I lost a lot of friends. There's a lot of people that are really have some difficulty.
One of those didn't come on the battlefield.
You come home and you're not welcome. It just felt horrible. It felt like you weren't respected at all, that you had put your life on the line, and people didn't care. I'm going to tell my wife.
But Fischer found someone who did care. His wife, Wanda, of 55 years.
How long was it, hon? Do you remember? A couple of years.
They met not long after he came home. Over half a century, 2 kids and 4 grandkids later.
I'm so fortunate. And no more scars. She'd probably argue about the scars, but no more scars that I'm carrying around anyway.
Our thanks to Sarah for that report and to Ron for sharing his story. We also learned of the story of Army Staff Sergeant Arthur Whitnick Jr. He served in the famed 101st Airborne Division in Vietnam, and he was there for one of the bloodiest and toughest battles of the war on Hamburger Hill. Ken Houston from WTNH in Connecticut has his story.
It's not about history, it's about living in a war.
Those stories are told in this book, Nonsense, written by Arthur Whitnick Jr.
Here's a photo of me.
At age 76, his memories from the front lines of Vietnam are still being remembered.
This was in February of 1970. We were losing anywhere between 200 and 300 young men killed every week. My parents didn't want me to go.
As an infantryman, they feared his chances of seeing the brutalities of war, but his mom offered this way of escape just moments before Arthur boarded a plane at Bradley International Airport.
We want to send you to Canada. Here's $2,000 to get you on a different flight, and you can get set up in Canada. So I looked at that money, and I thought for a second, I can't do it. I got to go.
A brave choice by the man who says he would not be the coward who runs away. In the late 60s, Arthur headed to Vietnam, assigned to the 101st Airborne Division. One of their assignments, the Battle for Hamburger Hill. GIs gave it that nickname because of the number of soldiers who died there.
Roughly 65 or 68 young men were killed there, and another 300 wounded.
Tough lessons were also learned during the 9-day tour of duty, like the time he neglected to share a can of peaches with his squad while waiting for hours to get into assault position.
Nobody else brought food, just me. So while I'm eating them, my squad members are looking at me and said, "Hey, Wicknick, run the peaches." In other words, pass them around. I gobbled them up in front of them. So as a new unit leader, I just set a bad example of not sharing.
But Arthur redeemed himself by managing to get a manufacturer in New Hampshire, with the help of his mom, to send him and his squad a care package.
Well, I wrote to that company and I said, "My mother sent me a can of your product. I want to buy a case to share with my guys because I wanted to make up for the peach deal." And about a week and a half later, a whole case of apple juice in little cans shows up. And then there was a letter that says, "Send no money. This is the way we're going to show our support for what you guys are doing over there."
Just one of the many stories from the front lines of Vietnam, chronicled in Nam Sense.
Many thanks to Ken for sharing with us the story of Arthur Wicknick. As we said, we put out the call to Vietnam veterans all over the country to share their war experience with us, and we were bowled over by the response. We heard from people like Richard Audette of South Hadley, Massachusetts, who told us, "I served 2 tours in Vietnam, 1968 to 1970, with an engineering battalion. We cleared jungles and were exposed to sniper fire, poisonous snakes, booby traps, and landmines. Things changed that second year. There was a lack of direction, and it seemed that most of the men there were just surviving. I was wounded by shrapnel and spent a bit of time in the med unit." And we heard from a Marine Corps veteran named Doug Hurst, who didn't want to go on camera, but his moving pictures from Vietnam more than tell the story.
A long time ago, in a world almost forgotten,
He sent us his old 8mm films shot on the ground in Vietnam. He says he was one of the few with a Super 8 movie camera around back then. He was sent to Vietnam in April 1969. Upon landing at Da Nang, the war became real. They were told to remain seated. They were already under rocket attack. He received the message that he had, in his words, just entered a dangerous world. Next up, he was sent to Dong Ha, where a rocket attack killed one of their men and destroyed some of their gear. The Marines you see in this picture are standing around the crater left by that rocket. His job was to help make contact with and lock on to American aircraft, guide them to their target, and drop their ordnance. Unfortunately, the aircraft they were helping guide often were low on fuel and had to drop their ordnance before they could even land. If they could reach a target, great. Otherwise, they had to drop it all in the South China Sea. Douglas tells us the Americans dropped millions of pounds of ordnance, mostly 250 and 500-pound dumb bombs. Eventually, in November 1969, he was sent to Japan. He was given the Navy Commendation Medal for his efforts in Vietnam. Douglas says he'd like to say every bomb they dropped was a direct hit, but again, in his words, "I've not lied so far, so I won't start now." His old film, a time capsule, taking us back a half-century to help tell the story of a Marine Corps veteran serving his country in a war zone. Thanks to Douglas Hurst for giving us a first-hand view of what it was like to be in Vietnam more than half a century ago. Marco Ramirez from CBS 4 in Harlingen, Texas, brings us the story of a South Texas veteran who says even though he had a tough time in Vietnam, he'd do it all over again.
You go home after school and the news is on, Walter Cronkite is on, and he's talking about this place called Vietnam. And it's all over. I had no idea where that was at. It was on the other side of the world.
Felix Rodriguez grew up in Elsa, Texas, and always knew he would join the military. His father served in World War II, and Rodriguez strived to be like him. When he turned 18, Felix entered the draft to join the Army. And once his training was completed, he was sent off to Vietnam at his request.
Personally, I didn't feel like we should have been there anyway, either. I was against us being in Vietnam. But country called.
It was 1970, and Rodriguez was part of a team in Vietnam that intercepted enemy Morse code to U.S. soldiers in the field. But the toughest job for Felix was just staying alive. Only 7 months into his deployment, Rodriguez endured a harrowing experience that has stayed with him forever.
You could hear that mortar coming in. All you heard was, incoming.
The bunker Rodriguez was sleeping in was hit by a rocket in the middle of the night. He and his fellow soldier Floyd Youngblood Jr. survived the blast, but Rodriguez soon realized his friend was severely injured and bleeding rapidly. Rodriguez says his training kicked in, and he was determined to get his friend out alive.
He said, "Is it bad, Felix?" I said, "Yeah, man, it's bad. Am I gonna die?" "No, you ain't gonna die, man. You're not gonna die. I'm not gonna let you die. I'm here with you."
Rodriguez was able to stop Floyd's bleeding, but needed to get him out of the bunker that was on the brink of collapsing on them. With gunfire pouring down around them, Felix had one shot to get him out.
And he gives me the other good arm, and he says, "Okay, now, Youngblood, push." So I pulled him out with one arm. My guardian angel was with me.
And after running through gunfire, Felix and other soldiers managed to get Floyd on a chopper and airlifted to safety. Felix wouldn't see him again for at least 20 years.
Later, when I went and found him in Houston, he said, "The last thing I saw before I passed out was you. You saved my life." We're both hugging each other, and we're both crying. We're both crying. And he goes, "I never got to thank you. Never got to thank you." I said, "Hey, man, we're brothers. We were brothers. There's no need to thank you." They said, "You would have done the same to me." I said, "Yeah, I would have, but it turns out it didn't work out that way. But I'm glad it was you there that was there with me. And all these years I've been thinking about you."
While Rodriguez says he did not agree with the U.S. involvement in Vietnam, he's glad he was there because he was able to save a generation of people from Floyd's family. Rodriguez also started his own family after leaving the Army in 1973, but he says transitioning back to civilian life has always been a challenge, even half a century later. But it's the current brotherhood of Vietnam War vets across the Rio Grande Valley that has helped them carry on, since they are the only ones that can talk to each other about what they went through.
And we all feel the same way, that we have this guilt. Sometimes we feel the guilt that we came home alive when others did not.
While Rodriguez says our country may be in turmoil for now, veterans like him will still follow the one code of never leaving anybody behind.
And here, long after we do no longer wear the uniform of the greatest country in the world, we will continue to live by that code until the day we die.
And still to come as we share the first-person stories of those who served in Vietnam, this soldier tells us about his worst day at war.
My worst day in Vietnam started my first day in Vietnam.
How he got a feel for just how deadly war can be minutes after he got to the war zone. His story right after this. Welcome back as we keep the conversation going with veterans who served in Vietnam more than 50 years ago. We put out the call all across the country for veterans to share their stories with us, and the response was overwhelming. We heard from Francis Hall of North Las Vegas, Nevada, who told us in early 1967, after some personal struggles, I dropped out of college. I ended up in Vietnam. He says one day he was reassigned and sent away from his men, and the timing was both lucky and tragic. He says, that night I listened on the radio to the screams from the men in my battery getting hit. My old gun was knocked out and all my friends wounded. And Francis joins us right now via Zoom to tell us a little bit more about his service in Vietnam. We appreciate you talking to us, Francis.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, Jeremy.
So tell me, if you could, about your worst day in Vietnam.
My worst day in Vietnam started my first day in Vietnam. I just got in country, and I had pulled guard duty on my artillery unit and was talking to a guy, and all of a sudden he was dead.
Wow.
And we were starting to get incoming, and I just hit the dirt, and it was the scariest part of my life.
Wow. So right away you got this taste for how serious this was going to be.
Yes, sir. And then there was that incident at Thunder 3 where my old unit got hit just after I left, which is very lucky for me. And my last day in Vietnam, they still tried to get me.
What happened on your last day?
I was in an underground bunker that collapsed, and somebody couldn't sleep and woke us up, and I was the last person up the door, and the force of the blast threw me across the parking lot.
You couldn't get out of there soon enough, could you?
Oh man.
Were you ever seriously injured during your time over there?
Fortunately, I wasn't, no.
Yeah. Tell me what happened at Firebase Thunder 3.
Thunder 3 was on, it was called Thunder Road. It was a road coming out of Saigon going to the north, and there was fire support bases spread along it. And we were at Thunder 3 one day. We'd been there for a couple of days, and everything was quiet, nothing going on, and I was on gun 6. And the runner came up, said, First Sergeant needed to see me. I thought, well, okay, I'm in trouble. But I went up to see him. He says, Hall, can you type? I said, yes, sir. He said, well, you're the new battery clerk, so get on that chopper out there that's warming up and report back to the base camp. And I've never moved so fast in my life, Jeremy. I had my old friends on the gun. They didn't even know what was going on. I just grabbed my bag and just left.
Yeah. So you got out of there and just in
I got out of there, and then that evening they got hit. My old gun got hit. All the guns were knocked out, actually, which is quite rare for an artillery unit in Vietnam in those days. All the people on my old gun were wounded. And I still keep in touch with a few of them. Just nothing like terror, to bond people together.
Do you often think about what might have happened had you not been reassigned at the last minute?
Jeremy, I've thought about that every day of my life. There's no answer to that. I can ponder it all I want, but there's no answer to that. It's just luck of the draw. I had the privilege recently to be on an honor flight from Southern Nevada to D.C. with 35 other veterans. And it was a singular experience in my life. Very defining, very heartwarming. I felt very honored to be part of that.
Yeah.
I haven't felt that way in a long time. Yeah. We got out of Vietnam. I left Vietnam in 1969, and we pulled out as a country just a few years later.
Yeah.
And because of all the turmoil, the political turmoil, the personal turmoil going on in those days, we never talked about it. Never talked about the war, what happened over there. It was just something you never talked about.
Do you talk about it now?
Yes. Yes. My first night in country, when that mortar round came in and killed the guy standing beside me, and I hit the dirt, I was never more scared in my life. But then almost instantly, the order came for fire mission. I had to stand up. I had to do my job. And I did it. That right there was the singular most defining moment in my life, to face fear like that and to just overcome it. I have a hat I wear today that says duty, honor, country. And that's what the Army drilled into us. Do your duty, do it honorably, and do it for your country.
I'll bet there was a time when you wouldn't have worn anything that said Vietnam veteran on it, right?
Many years, yes, sir. Many years. When I got out of Vietnam, I went back to college and finished up. And you didn't talk about it. There were still protests going on in college campuses in those days, and you didn't talk about it.
When did that change, and why do you think it changed?
I think it started to change in, 1975 when we pulled out of Vietnam. A defining moment for our country, and as well as for the people in their country. All the boat people ensued. A lot of immigrants come into this country that were relocated. Affected a lot of people's lives. I have a dentist here in Las Vegas that I went to recently. He was one of the boat people who came over in, I don't know, 75, 76, when it was all going on. Changed his life.
What do you, in wrapping up here, what do you wish people knew about the Vietnam War that maybe they didn't at the time or maybe still don't now?
The futility of it. I grew up in an era where we were proud to be in the United States. We won World War II. We helped win World War I. We, prevailed in Korea. We were the prevailing force in the world. And Vietnam changed all that. Mm-hmm. It changed it in my mind.
Yeah. Well, I feel like America's gotten a little smarter about the respect they've given Vietnam veterans in the last 50 plus years. And I hope you've experienced that yourself. And if nobody else says it or ever will say it again, I want to say it. Thank you for your service in Vietnam. And thank you for all you've done for your country.
Thank you, Jeremy. I really appreciate that.
Francis Hall joining us via Zoom from North Las Vegas, Nevada. Thanks so much, Francis.
You're welcome.
Now to Michigan, where we heard about the story of John Koistra, who has just begun in the last decade or so to embrace his Vietnam experience. Brad Sterling from WOOD-TV in Grand Rapids shares his story.
And it will tear you to pieces.
John Koistra still carries shrapnel, not metaphorical, but the real metal kind.
The Viet Cong would usually lob a few mortars rounds at the base camp.
Shards once heated by explosions that rocked his camp in the central highlands of Vietnam.
You never knew, which direction the mortar came from, but you never knew how far back, how many miles he was away from the camp.
John Koistra was 21 in 1966 when he found himself shipped halfway around the globe.
I was drafted, but we were sent over there and we did our job.
The corporal was attached to the 551st Light Maintenance Company, soldiers tasked with stitching up tanks and trucks. As the company clerk, John Koistra filed the war, memo by memo, from a sweating base carved out of the tropical forests in the middle of a country far from home.
A backward country, and it was jungle. They were bulldozing an area for us to live. And we lived in 10-man tents. As I remember, we didn't talk politics too much. We were here to do a job, and that's what we did.
And while John was able to avoid direct conflict, he still carries scars from that war. There was another enemy hiding in the trees, hanging in the air. The poison known as Agent Orange.
We didn't know about Agent Orange until we got back here, and it's been, I would say, 10, 15 years that you really read.
Agent Orange was the toxin sprayed across the jungle to peel back the veil of vegetation. John didn't know he was breathing it. No one did.
We knew it affected the defoliant. It was a defoliant that they would spray it, and you find out afterwards that some spots they sprayed more than at other spots we were in.
Decades later, it was why, as John explains, the war returned quietly.
I was about 65 years old when I noticed different things, and then you put two and two together, so that I went to the doctor here. And the first visit I had with him, he told me that I had a cousin of Parkinson's.
Parkinson's disease, said the doctors. Not a bullet, but just as lethal. Agent Orange was the culprit.
But now it steadily gets worse and worse. I don't blame anyone here, but the government is taking a responsibility, even now.
When John Koistra finished his tour of Vietnam, he came back home to West Michigan. He got a job, settled down, and married his high school sweetheart. The same girl who waved him off to war, she remains beside him decades later. his partner, and now caregiver. Nearing 80, John says he wants people to know what was sacrificed, not to glorify, but to remember.
And you see all the names on the memorial, 50,000 that never came back. For what? In the end, we lost it all or gave it away.
John Koistra's hands still hold the fragments of war, a reminder of a conflict fought without clarity, without clean edges. Proof that sometimes the deepest wounds are the ones you carry home.
Next up, he was a hero in not one, but two wars.
He just didn't share. He didn't talk about it.
The Vietnam veteran whose service to his country extended far beyond Vietnam. When we come back. We're back sharing the stories of Vietnam veterans a half century after the fall of Saigon. We've been reporting on Vietnam veterans all year long and wanted to keep the conversation going. Retired Air Force Major Don Harton shared his harrowing Vietnam experience with anchor John Langler from 8 News Now in Las Vegas.
And this is the 4 of us who survived.
They're everywhere.
A painting they did of our B-52 crash.
Reminders of service to country.
I loved it over there. I didn't mind it at all.
Truth be told, if the pictures didn't remind you, retired Major Don Harton is happy to fill in the blanks.
I'm probably America's leading combat pilot.
He's not shy.
I'm not bragging about it, I'm just saying it.
Harton now lives in Las Vegas, but it's his years flying jets in the Vietnam War that define his life.
I still feel the Vietnam War was the most important war we ever fought. We stopped communism, and we won it.
Harton's service in Vietnam was unique because he was there almost the entire time. He started flying secret B-52 missions in 1965. He finished flying fighter jets in 1972. More than 300 combat missions. He barely survived them all.
They have a saying called hours and hours of boredom and moments of sheer terror.
Harton's terror started early. He was a co-pilot on Arc Light 1, a B-52 with a secret mission to bomb North Vietnam.
It was the first B-52 raid of the war. The war was just getting started.
Before the group of 30 planes got to the target, tragedy.
He could see them, and they were coming right straight at us.
The object flying at Harton and his crew, another B-52.
1,100 miles an hour closing speed. That's kind of fast.
They collided thousands of feet above the South Pacific.
I went through the 5 stages of grief in a microsecond.
Harton survived the collision, only to parachute straight into a super typhoon. That he also managed to survive.
It's an epic story, but
Harton is one of 4 airmen to make it out of the crash.
When you lose 8 buddies in a crash like I was, you got to do something. You got to make up for it.
So he kept flying.
Missiles coming up from 10 o'clock to 3 o'clock.
Harton graduated to F-105s and F-111s, quick, nimble fighter jets.
It is the most beautiful plane, and it handles just like a dream.
Through countless bombing runs, Harton made it to the other side.
This is the last of the F-111 guys.
Today, Harton's a retired so-called river rat, a select group of veterans who flew fighter jets over North Vietnam.
I was doing something very important to stop the communists.
He chronicled his story in this book. It's a story he was reluctant to tell, but couldn't keep it to himself.
It's in my heart, it's in my mind, it's in my soul. Can't get rid of it, don't want to. It's just part of me.
Thanks to John for sharing that amazing story. We also heard from Terry McCormack of Gary, Indiana, who wanted to share the story of her father's bravery, and not just in Vietnam. Jackie Bang from WGN in Chicago has the story.
Strewn about on a long card table are photos which tell the story of William Park's military career.
I think these are Panama. These are actual down the bunker.
Sisters Terry and Sheila, along with their 2 siblings, lived the Army life, constantly moving. Their father was a master sergeant in the Army. Beyond that, they knew little about his job.
I learned more about it after I was an adult than I ever knew as a kid growing up. He just didn't share. He didn't talk about it.
Before passing away in 2014, Parks finally suggested they discover his past. In 1952, a young 17-year-old found himself in a foxhole with an injured officer during the Korean War. Despite heavy enemy fire, Parks risked his life to alert U.S. artillery of the oncoming attack.
He didn't have any officer training. He was a 17-year-old kid. Who does that?
For that act of bravery, Parks earned the Silver Star, the nation's third highest military honor. He was wounded and was also given the Purple Heart.
Alone and unafraid at 17, 18 years old. It's just amazing.
Longtime friend and former Marine Tim Cole helped Parks' family on their journey of discovery. This impressive array of medals is the result of more than 2 years of research and applications to the government.
The minute I saw some of the awards that she had and began reading some of the things, it just captured me. I mean, this is a true hero.
The sisters would also learn their father was among the first Green Berets who fought in Vietnam, an experience which haunted him.
He's told me that I've done a lot of really bad things. I had to do a lot of really bad things. He would never elaborate on what those things were.
McCormack was inspired to write about her father's war experiences. A 3-page essay can be found in this book titled Beyond Belief: True Stories of Indiana Heroes That Defy Comprehension. Along with his extensive service record, McCormack included a speech by her father from a commencement ceremony in the late 1960s. His words still ring true today.
These are truly dark days of our time, but as surely as days turn into night, or comes a matador's famed moment of truth, the laws of the nation will prevail, and freedom will flourish with every breath of our great country.
A Master Sergeant, Green Beret, and multiple medal recipient, but to his children, he was simply their father and their protector.
He's a hero. To me, he's my hero.
Thanks to Jackie Bang at WGN in Chicago for sharing that story of service and sacrifice in Vietnam. As we said, we reached out to veterans all around the country, asking them to share their war experience, and our veteran community really responded. And in some cases, their relatives reached out too, like Katherine Eller Martin of Charleston, South Carolina, who told us, "My father, Naval Chaplain Max A. Eller, served in Vietnam during 1968. And there's an extraordinary photo of him baptizing a soldier at Na Bay on the Saigon River in Vietnam. It shows that God's peace can be found anywhere, even in a war zone." And Katherine joins us right now via Zoom. Katherine, it's an honor to talk with you. Really appreciate you making the time.
You're so welcome. Thank you for asking me.
What do you know about his service over there? What stories have you been told?
Well, I can tell you I didn't hear anything until after I was grown and married. I do know that when my father first got over there to Saigon, he was housed at a hotel called the Splendid Hotel. And his first few nights were not as welcoming as we would think. He spent his nights under the bed hiding because it was being bombed. A lot of the higher ranking officers were housed there. So it's kind of a rocky start to his trip to Saigon. While he was there, he wasn't allowed to carry any weapons. He had an escort wherever he went. And he ministered to the soldiers there. Didn't matter what their religious affiliation was. He did all denominations, whatever it was, he was there for them to minister to their needs.
There's a special moment in the river there. Tell me about that.
Yes, my father in 1968 did some baptisms in the Saigon River. And I sent you a picture, and it shows him baptizing an enlisted man. What that picture tells me, you've heard the old story about a picture says 1,000 words. This really does, because it shows that God's presence can be found anywhere, even in a war zone. And in this case, we have two men that were brothers in arms that became brothers in Christ at that moment. And I think that is really poignant. I'm really happy that I have that. It was in a publication. Unfortunately, I don't recall what it was, My mother, God bless her, she can't remember which one it was. But I have the photo. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. I don't know anything about the gentleman who was baptized. I really hope that he made it home. I'm grateful my dad did. My father is one of the most incredible people. I can't believe I was so lucky to have him as my dad. Just a very caring, wonderful, humble man, and has always been that way his whole life. And I think that's part of what made him such a good pastor, is that he's humble and kind and caring. And he certainly ministered to many, many people there. You know, he was not exempt from seeing the ugly side of war. One time he was on a PT boat, and a lot of the soldiers were really young. They got shot at, and one of the soldiers had his head blown off, to be perfectly honest, and it just scared the daylights out of all of them. My dad is the one that carried that body off that boat because everyone was so scared. But they were all so young.
Tell me about his life after the war. What did he do after Vietnam?
Oh, well, he continued. He was a career serviceman. We lived in Charleston at the Naval Weapons Station there. Went to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. I lived there. One of the few people who can say, hey, I lived at Gitmo. He ended up going to Okinawa. He ended up in Washington, D.C., retiring there. Was the director of the chaplain school in Newport, Rhode Island. He had quite a career. After he retired, he did a lot of interim pastoring and continued to do that until he just really couldn't anymore. So Daddy passed away in 2019. But wow, what a life. He was always a very devout Christian, as is my mother still, who will be 93 next month. And so I think it's been a really tremendous example set to me and my brothers as to how to live life and how to be a good person and a good Christian to everybody, regardless. He came back and he was just my dad. But I remember going to the airport. I was 8 years old. It's very emotional to talk about, to be honest with you. But I remember we were walking to the gate. That's back when you could. And my dad came around the corner. And my mom, she fell to her knees. I think she just couldn't believe that he was home. My mother has kept every letter that my dad wrote since 1960. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you could see this. This is one from May of 1968.
Wow. This
is one from December 1968, and it says, Homeward Bound, January of 69. You didn't have to pay postage at that time. So my mother has all those letters. And when my daddy passed in 2019, I will say that those letters brought a lot of comfort to her, because when she couldn't sleep, she'd get up in the middle of the night and reread them.
Wow.
She just reread her life with my dad. And we still have them.
We're so honored that you wrote in and told us about him, and we're just thrilled to be able to share his story.
Well, I really appreciate you reaching out to me. Anything I can do to honor my dad.
Still to come, he was just a teenager when he found out he was headed to war. So does war really change everyone who serves there? You might be surprised by the answer we got from Vietnam veteran Mark Deem when we come back. Thanks for staying with us as we tell the stories of Vietnam veterans from all over the country who served their country more than 50 years ago. Veterans like Lonzo Walker, who was injured 7 times during an ambush and left the war with 2 Purple Hearts. Reporter Ozzy Mora from 8 News Now in Las Vegas has that story.
A dimly lit living room, but filled to the brim with symbols of his journey.
How many tournaments have you participated in?
Wow, that's a lot.
A lot of trophies for Vietnam War veteran Lonzo Walker. Awards highlighting more than 50 years of martial arts mastery.
You're a black belt, obviously.
Yes, started studying martial arts as a pass the time and kind of relax my mind.
And yet, these accolades shadowing the battles within himself. We go back in time when Walker was a young man living in Las Vegas.
October 1968, I went into the Army.
Army Specialist E4 Walker.
Did you always want to serve?
No,
No. How did your journey lead to serving?
just to get out of Las Vegas.
Why?
I wasn't happy with my life then.
And months later, he was sent to Vietnam, where Walker tells me every day felt like his last.
I still have nightmares about it. I have nightmares about being stuck out in the middle of nowhere, and just seeing my friends around me getting shot.
Thousands of Americans were killed in the Vietnam War, a fight between North Vietnam backed by communist allies and South Vietnam supported by the U.S.
And we were ambushed, and I was walking point, and the gunfire went off, and I was hit, and there were 12 of us, and 9 of us was hit or killed at that encounter.
An encounter etching deep in his heart. After that, Walker says he received a Purple Heart, earning a second one while recovering in Japan. Walker returned home nearly 2 years later.
I hated the way that we were treated. Vietnam veterans were the forgotten soldiers. They just kind of like threw us under the war.
But here, today, and always, we're remembering.
Your perspective on life changed after Vietnam?
A lot. I was a different person. I was very angry, and I couldn't control my temper.
But now, Walker turning the pages of his memory.
Black belt on, white belt on.
Showing me pictures of his strength and what it took to make it back home.
Many thanks to Lonzo for sharing his story. And now the story of an MP, a military police officer, at a large base near Saigon at the height of the war. He's fighting a different kind of battle now with medical issues related to his service. Here again is Jackie Bang from WGN in Chicago.
That was when I was in freshman year of high school.
Faded photos of Michael Marceline at Waukegan High School north of Chicago.
They gave us fatigues to wear and a chrome hat.
He spent 4 years on the drill team and with ROTC. Marceline knew his path in life. His father and 3 uncles served in World War II.
I looked up in all of them, and I always wanted to be like they were.
Marceline joined the Air Force and became a law enforcement specialist or military police.
Just before I went on duty.
From October 1971 to 1972, he served at Tan Son Nhut, a vital air base located outside Saigon.
Where the bunker was for the main gate. That's where I normally worked.
You were out in the open.
Yeah.
Worried?
You always were worried. You always knew because they tell you a little bit of everything that would go on.
Sure enough, shortly after Marceline arrived, he had a close call with sniper fire. He wasn't hit, and it turned out to be friendly fire, accidental shots from a nearby watchtower.
And that was my first. I'm going, well, welcome to Vietnam.
He did dodge bullets, but Marceline could not escape another enemy. Agent Orange was a highly toxic herbicide used to eradicate the dense forest in Vietnam.
Nobody knew nothing about Agent Orange during the 70s when we were there.
Marceline was told it was bug spray. He, like millions of soldiers who came in contact with Agent Orange, would later suffer significant health problems. Now, at 75, Marceline has fought bladder cancer, suffered a heart attack, and has a pacemaker.
Could sit there and yell and scream and holler, but what's it going to do? I learned how to deal with it. And there's really nothing I can do.
Years of therapy helped bring Marceline peace, as did a recent official invitation. Earlier this year, Marceline joined other veterans with Honor Flight Chicago, a day-long trip to Washington, D.C., which pays tribute to the men and women who served in war. For this Vietnam vet, it was a long overdue and welcome recognition of his service.
Thanks again to our Chicago team for that story. As we said, we put out the call to Vietnam veterans around the country to share with us their experience. And one of those who wrote in was Mark Dimma of Sydney, Ohio. He says, I served in the infantry. I was wounded once, May 9th, 1968 on Hill 352 and was awarded a Bronze Star. And Mark joins us right now via Zoom. Mark Deem, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your service, by the way, too. And speaking of your service, if you could, tell us how you found yourself in Vietnam all those years ago.
Well, I was drafted August 15th, 1967. I reported to Fort Benning, Georgia for basic training. So I was there for 8 weeks. I was going to come home and get married after basic training, but 3 days before the end of basic training, I got orders to get on the bus and go straight to Fort Polk, Louisiana, which was infantry training. So from that, I kind of knew probably what was going to happen. So I did come home and get married after AIT at Fort Polk, Louisiana. And then 2 weeks later, I reported to Fort Lewis, Washington, and ended up staying there to the month of January. I thought I was going straight to Vietnam from there, but a whole bunch of us were all going to the Americana Division as replacements, and they didn't have orders for us to go yet. So this was January of 68. So I ended up coming home on a 6-day leave because the captain in charge of us didn't know what to do with us. They were just keeping us busy, sitting out in the rain all the time up there, doing stuff we just done at Fort Polk, Louisiana. I don't know that I really thought that much about it. I mean, I just turned 20 years old at that time. So at that time you think you're invincible, I guess. And I just kind of went along with the flow, and what it was. And when I first got there, our company was south of Da Nang, about 15 miles, at a place called LZ Baldy. And we were out in the field all the time, and the whole company was together at that point, and there just wasn't much going on. And I thought, this is going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in May, that all changed. So
yeah,
but for a while, this was right when Tet was kind of winding down, supposedly. And these guys had been up in Da Nang, defending Da Nang before I got there. They lost some guys that I never knew. Mm-hmm. But at this point, there just wasn't that much going on. And so I thought, this isn't going to be too bad.
and then you realized it was going to be pretty bad. Tell me about that day that kind of changed everything.
Well, it was probably about May 7th or 6th, somewhere in there. We were just out on a patrol in the morning, and the company commander got a radio call to set up a perimeter that helicopters were going to pick us up and take us somewhere. We didn't know where we were going. It ended up, we went to a place called LZ West, which is out west of Tam Key in the mountains. And there was a fire base there. There were bunkers all around it. The only people there was a LRP team, a long range reconnaissance patrol, like maybe 6 guys. It was all there. And they had trip flares all over the top of that hill, because it was a big hill and there were only 6 of them. So we occupied the bunkers, and then they left, and we stayed there for a couple days, I guess. The next day, some rockets got fired west of us over our heads, probably heading to LZ Center, which is where our brigade talk was. And I don't know. I never heard where they landed or anything. But then that next day, a couple helicopters got shot down south of LZ Center from a hill called Hill 352. And they called helicopter gunships in, and they found out that they were being fired at by something more than small arms fire. Turned out to be a 51 caliber machine gun that the NVA had up there. So all day long, they had fighters. There 8 fighters were in the air all day long. They worked in pairs. So 2 of them would be making their runs and dropping their bombs. And then when they left, the next pair would go in, and 2 more pair would come on station. And they just went on all day, pounding that hill. One fighter actually got shot down. Never did hear what happened to it or anything, or what happened to the pilot. So about, it was on the 8th of May, we got picked up, and we got dumped out north of Hill 352, and our objective was go to Hill 352. Well, another company in our battalion, B Company, 1st Battalion, 6th Infantry, they got there before we did, and they went up the, it'd be the north side of that hill, and they captured that 51 caliber machine gun. And they had pictures of it and stuff. So we follow them up maybe half hour to an hour later, and we kind of get behind them. This isn't a real big hill, and I think there can't be anybody left there. Well, there was. So we kind of tried to dig foxholes. You can only get a couple feet deep because it was all rocky and stuff. So nothing happened until early in the morning, and some mortars got fired by the NVA, and they were landing outside a perimeter, but they must not have, they weren't exploding. So they must have not pulled the safety bins on them or something. I don't know. So that when it got light, we started moving towards where the NVA were, south of us. And we no sooner started moving, and there's the NVA, they were in spider holes all over that hill. And I got a piece of shrapnel in my knee almost immediately. And I'm laying on the ground and watching these guys. They're walking right up to the holes and shooting them. And end up, there were 2 guys that were killed, and there were 17 of us that were wounded.
Tell me about the feeling when you finally got the orders to go home and when you finally got on that plane and we're going to get out of the war zone. What's that feel like?
Oh, that was great. I thought about extending, actually. If you came back with less than 5 months, they just let you out. And I would have had to extend for 45 days. And I was married at that time. And of course, our only communication was letters. So, we wrote back and forth, and we kind of decided, no, I better get out of there when I can. So, I just came back to Sydney, Ohio, and went back to work on a survey crew at ODOT, and spent 34 years there and retired.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for your service and for sharing your story, and we really appreciate everything you've done for this country and continue to do for the good folks of Ohio there. They're lucky to have a guy like you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Enjoyed it.
Our thanks to Mark Deem and to all the veterans who shared their stories with us. And a big thank you to our teams of reporters, photographers, and producers from all over the country for gathering these firsthand accounts of war so none of us ever forget. I'm Jeremy Hubbard. Thanks for joining us.